At the time of me recording this video, M.O.D.O.K is coming out tomorrow, but by the time you see this video, M.O.D.O.K will be just a few hours away. So I wanted to do my usual pre-release video. I do this for every new card, or at least I will be doing it for every new card. We're going to go over some important key deck archetypes for M.O.D.O.K, how he's going to slot into the game, some ways to counter M.O.D.O.K if that's what you're trying to do. Maybe you're not someone who gets the Season Pass, so you instead want to counter the Season Pass card. And then we'll evaluate where I think he's going to end up in the metagame. Alright, let's move into the summary. He's a 5/8 with the effect on reveal, discard your hand. Firstly, 5/8 is an efficient stat line, so he's off to a good start, but he also dumps your entire hand. There are already decks that want to run cards like Hellcow, and she only gets rid of 2 cards, but M.O.D.O.K can get rid of up to 7 cards. Even with a full hand, most of the time it is going to be 6, but sometimes it is possible to get rid of a whole 7 through like really niche interactions. That's just to say that M.O.D.O.K gets rid of a lot of cards. It has never been possible to get rid of more than 2 cards with a single card, so just by the nature of that being the case, he will open up a few unique discard strategies that up until now probably weren't worth running. So let's talk about some expectations. First of all, I expect the first few days of ladder to be a lot of Hella decks, because when you first look at M.O.D.O.K, the first instinct that I think a lot of people are going to have is just, well, let's put this in a Hella deck, let's play Invisible Woman, let's put the M.O.D.O.K under Invisible Woman, and then play Hella right on top of that, and then we'll add in 9 other cards into the deck. There are some other archetypes that M.O.D.O.K could fit into, and we're going to go over those in this video, but at the end of the day, I think the true home for M.O.D.O.K is going to end up being Hella, and maybe the Apocalypse deck we talk about later. And he will be a strong card in that archetype. Like I said, there is nothing in the game right now that just says get rid of my entire hand, and those decks really want to do that, especially if they can get away with doing it on turn 6, the same turn that they're playing Hella. Let's talk about countering M.O.D.O.K for a sec. We talked a little bit about what he'll be doing in the meta, so how do we go about countering that particular strategy? Everyone and their dog is going to be playing M.O.D.O.K, so this might be some important information. There are actually quite a few strong counters to M.O.D.O.K. First of all was everyone's best boy, Cosmo. Cosmo's fantastic at shutting down not only M.O.D.O.K himself, but the follow-up, the ideal follow-up to M.O.D.O.K, which is Hella. Plus, that Hella player is often going to communicate very early in the game where they're going to want to play their Hella, because their ideal setup is that Invisible Woman thing we talked about earlier, so they're going to go Invisible Woman, they're going to go M.O.D.O.K, and they're going to go Hella. But as soon as you see that Invisible Woman, you can play that Cosmo, and now that combo they were going for is a heck of a lot more awkward. As far as other counters go, we have Stature, which is an unreleased card, but upon her release, she'll have a really strong matchup going in against a M.O.D.O.K deck, because she won't need to play her own activation to be able to reduce her cost down to 1. So that matchup's probably favored for Stature, so maybe you want to build a Stature-oriented deck. And the last few counters we're going to focus on are the Goblins and the other disruption effects that are in the game, like Debris and even Professor X. All of these cards are good against Hella essentially for the same reason, especially because of M.O.D.O.K versions. If you can brick their Invisible Woman location, it ruins their typical setup, and they're going to have to adapt and try something else, or they're going to have to just retreat for the cubes. Now, keep in mind though, their Invisible Woman location only needs 2 available slots, their M.O.D.O.K and their Hella. Previous versions of Hella would get really punished if even you put just 1 card in their Invisible Woman location. But thanks to M.O.D.O.K, you're going to need to be able to put 2 cards in their location to completely ruin it. So Disruption is definitely a weaker counter to Hella than it used to be, but it should still be pretty solid. That's not to say there's not more counters against a card like M.O.D.O.K, but those are going to be your big heavy hitters. Alright, let's go into some deck lists now. Let's start things off with a Wong Hella package. This version of Hella is trying to take advantage of Nick Fury and Helicarrier, both of which are currently underperforming, but if Helicarrier and Nick Fury were to ever perform well in a Hella deck, it would definitely be after the release of a card that reads discard your entire hand. We also run a handful of cute combos that can only be activated in this deck if we're building Zabu. For example, we can play Zabu on 3, we can play Wong on 4, we can play Wave on 5, and then on 6 we can play Hella and Hellcow. Oh, well, you would want to play Hellcow first and then Hella, but you understand the point. You can also do smaller versions of that. You could go Invisible Woman on 2, Zabu on 3, Wong Hellcow on 4, Nick Fury on 5, and then Hella on 6. I'm definitely excited to try this out because I've been hoping for the day that Nick Fury and Helicarrier really shine, and we haven't really hit that point yet. With enough discard procs, though, one day I truly believe this will be an efficient combo. One thing I will mention while we're here, though, talking about a Wong Hella deck, because a lot of people aren't familiar with this. If you play Hella on the Wong location, and then Hella brings back a discard card. So, for example, let's say we played Wong, Hellcow, then Hela. Hellcow would first discard 2 cards from your hand, and if she discarded M.O.D.O.K from your hand, Hela would then resummon M.O.D.O.K, discarding the rest of your cards, and then her on reveal would trigger again, now summoning back in all the cards that M.O.D.O.K discarded as well. Which is one reason that I actually really like running Wong and Hela in the same deck. It's just about coming up with the other 11 cards to put in the deck, or the other 10 cards, I should say. All right, this time we're going to be looking at a Swarm-oriented list. Well, truth be told, it's more of a Dracula Apocalypse-oriented list that happens to run Swarm. It's similar to an old deck that we played in the early days of the beta, so early beta players rise up, you'll recognize this package. Our goal is to play Dracula on 4, M.O.D.O.K on 5, and then on turn 6, either play Chavez or Apocalypse, and then have Dracula discard whichever one we didn't play. This puts the opponent in kind of a weird 50-50 situation. They have to guess, okay, is the America Chavez going to go to the Dracula lane, or is America Chavez going to get played? That 50-50 is more powerful than you might think, because if the opponent's trying to read what ranges you have, how much power you can develop in each location, they're not going to know exactly which side that's happening at. So I think oftentimes we'll be able to put opponents in 50-50s with this deck, and that sounds like a fun time, because I think a lot of people in that spot will retreat, even though I don't think it's correct. I think most of the time when you're in a 50-50, you should play it out. In the early game, we want to play cards like the Collector and Morbius, both of which will receive buffs from our other cards. We also run cards like Swarm and Wolverine to get value off of our M.O.D.O.K and our Hellcow. The Wong Hellcow together here essentially create a pseudo M.O.D.O.K. I think on average, M.O.D.O.K will discard like 4 to 5 cards, something like that. So Wong Hellcow is essentially doing the same thing, but Wong Hellcow is a 2-card combo. Plus, Wong can actually get value from M.O.D.O.K. If we Wong on 4 and we M.O.D.O.K on 5, M.O.D.O.K's going to proc twice, and that's going to fill our hand with a bunch of Swarms and an Apocalypse. Now, you might want to be a little bit careful with that. You're going to have to pay attention to your hand size, because depending on if you've already discarded Swarm at some point, you might run into an issue where you're going to have a full hand, and that means you won't draw your America Chavez, which means you won't be able to do that 50-50 setup that we just described before. So yeah, you have to pay attention to your hand, but assuming you're paying attention, I think it should work out just fine. This next deck is a bit of a different version of Hela. You probably haven't seen something like this before. This is Hela Ramp. Instead of running a lot of discard cards, we're only running 2. We're just running Hellcow and M.O.D.O.K, but we're also running ramp cards like Electro and Wave to try and ramp out our stronger cards during games that we're not able to draw Hela. My assumption is that this is not very strong, but I also like the idea of ramping out into Hela, something like Invisible Woman on 2, Wave on 3, Hela on 4, M.O.D.O.K on 5, and then Arrow on turn 6. Now, that particular combo requires top decking Arrow, and this strategy is probably fairly weak overall, but it's definitely something I want to try out. Plus, even if we don't top deck the Arrow and the Arrow's just in our hands, sometimes she'll just get resurrected by Hela and it will be fine. All right, this is probably the most spicy deck we have today. It's probably the worst of the decks that we have, but I wanted to show it off because I think it's a cool concept. It's all about our good friend Strong Guy. Man, it's been a while since we've seen Strong Guy have a big impact on the meta. Once upon a time, the man was very dominant. We run a bunch of powerful early game cards alongside a bit of destruction synergy. Ideally, we would like to play Strong Guy on turn 4 and then M.O.D.O.K on 5 and Chavez on 6. One cool thing about Wolverine is that he synergizes with both the destruction stuff in this deck and the discard stuff in this deck. All right, those are all the decks that I wanted to talk about today. I'm probably going to try and put out a video where we play every single one of these decks against some other content creator for the day of release, or at least the video will come out the day after release, but it'll be recorded on day of release. And I'm probably going to do that with every card going forward in the future, so keep an eye out for that. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and I'll catch you in the next one.